Hi everyone, and welcome back to our little mini-series on how to take better photos and videos with your iPhone. Before we jump too far into our series, I thought it would be a good idea to take a quick look at the actual menu settings on the iPhone as it relates to the camera app. Let's take a look. If you have had your iPhone for a while, you probably know where to find these settings, but just in case you don't, if you're new to the iPhone, you'll find it on your screen. It's kind of a gear wheel-shaped icon there, kind of gray. It says settings underneath. Just tap on that. Scroll up until you find an app that says camera. Let's just tap on that. And we'll see as we scroll up and down, there's just a whole lot of settings here that we can take a look at and make some adjustments. What I'll do is show you what I have set up on my phone. And at least while you're following along in this series, I would encourage you to do the same so that you can have very similar results to what I show you as we go through this series. Let's start at the top, record video. And let's tap on that, and we'll see that we have a number of options here that we could select. And you might be wondering, well, what is this all about? FPS, what is that? Well, it stands for frames per second. How many frames per second do you want your video to be recorded at? This, by the way, has to do with the video settings. If we tap back to camera, we'll see that coming up we'll be able to look at some of the settings as it relates to photographs as well. But right now the first one is record video. Now you see I have checkmarked the 4K at 24 frames per second. I recommend shooting all video at 4K. And the reason is because, first of all, you're future-proofing all of your video. 5-10 years from now, HD is just going to disappear and everybody will have and be working with 4K video. So here, right now, starting now, I recommend that you start shooting everything in 4K. If you're worried about the storage space on your camera, I have a solution for that. We'll talk about it in a minute. So 24, why 24 frames per second? Well, that's a matter of preference, really. 24 frames per second is very close to what the film rate is. When you go to watch a movie in the theaters, that is at what we call film rate, which is 23.98. But for now, just put it to 24. And I think that the video that you capture at that frame rate, you'll find to be more pleasing to the eye. The motion is going to be more smooth, more natural. It's going to look more cinematic. Now, I probably should say that if you are filming for somebody else and you know that they've asked you to take some video for their project, you might want to just check with them to see what frame rate they're doing all of their video at. And if they're shooting at 30 frames per second, then you might want to change this to 30 frames per second so that the video footage that you send them is going to match up with their footage. But I recommend 24 frames per second. Most film students will recommend 24 frames per second. 60 frames per second. Why would we ever want that? Well, if you see something that you think, I wonder if my editor might like to slow motion that shot for effect. And if you think that they might, then you might want to switch this to 60 frames per second. Because when you film something at 60 frames per second and the video editor changes that to be slow motion, the slow motion is going to have more to work with. It's going to be a much smoother slow motion. But just because you have set it here at 24 frames per second doesn't mean you're locked into this. We'll show you in our next lesson that when you're getting ready to take your shot, you will have the option of quickly changing the frame rate from 24 frames per second to 30 or 60, or even change from 4K to HD. You'll have that opportunity later without going into these settings. But if you want most of your shots to be at 24 frames per second, go ahead and set that here. Now, you might say, I don't see any 24 frames per second on my camera. How do I get that to show up on my camera? Well, it could be that if you purchased your iPhone in a country that is using the PAL standard TV format, your iPhone might by default come set to PAL settings, in which case you're probably seeing 4K at 25 frames per second. And that's fine. If you want to just keep it to 25 frames per second, that will still give you that kind of film look. And as long as you're shooting everything at 25 frames per second, that's fine. If you know that you're filming some shots for someone who's living in Canada, the United States, or Japan, and you want your footage to match up with all of the rest of the footage that they're using in the project, then you might want to change yours to 24 frames or ask them what frame rate they're using. And to get those frame rates, there's probably an option here. Mine shows here because I bought this phone in Canada, it shows the option to turn PAL formats on. Your iPhone might say show NTSC formats. And if you just slide that on, then take a look back, and now your options should include 4K at 24 frames per second. And you can select it there. You'll notice that now, because I've turned PAL on, I now have the option of 25 frames per second. All right, let's keep scrolling down here. I like to have enhanced stabilization on. And this helps when you're getting shots, especially when you're walking around. The iPhone does a really magnificent job of stabilizing your camera anyway, but here you can enhance that by having that turned on. Auto frames per second. If that's turned on in your menu, please turn it off. If you have this turned on, especially to 30 and 60 frames per second, every time you go to take a video shot, the computer of the camera is going to make a decision to go between one of those two, and none of your shots will be at 24 frames per second. In fact, I think if you have this on auto, there's a good chance that your frame rate is going to be all over the place. I've seen that from some phones, maybe not the iPhone. I've got the iPhone 15 Pro, and they maybe have locked this down. But some smartphones that I've gotten footage from in the past, the frame rate ends up being all over the place. You don't get a consistent frame rate. So I like to have that shut off and have it locked into the setting that I chose. Okay, one other one that I would like you to make sure that you have on, and that is lock the white balance. And now when you go to set up a shot, the computer inside the camera is going to make a decision on what it thinks is the correct white balance for that given lighting situation and lock it in. And that'll be better. All right, record slow motion. Let's see what the options are here. Well, it's 120 and 240. I would say you can probably just set that to 120. Again, in our next lesson, we'll show you how easy it is to change that to 240 just before you take the shot. And the real difference between the two is that when you have it set to 240, your motion is going to be that much slower. All right, record cinematic. I like to just keep that at 24 frames per second to keep it consistent with everything else I'm doing. Record sound. Stereo's fine. Formats. We need to take a look at this. I want to show you something here. Your options right at the top on an iPhone, and it might not be the same wording if you're using some kind of a smartphone, an Android phone. You probably have a couple of options here as to the type of codec that you want to save your video to. And your two options on an iPhone are high efficiency and most compatible. The difference between the two is that the high efficiency is going to create much smaller file sizes. It's going to compress your video shots down to much smaller file sizes so that you can get a lot more video, a lot more 4K video on your phone before you have to offload it to your computer or to your computer hard drive. And so I like to keep it on high efficiency. The downside of shooting in high efficiency is that it is an Apple codec. Well, at least it's a codec that PCs struggle with. Let's put it that way. So if you don't have a Mac, then you might want to change this to most compatible. Those file sizes will be much bigger. You'll fill up your hard drive a lot faster, but you'll be able to work with them on your computer much easier. There are ways around it if you are working with a PC and you want to save on the file sizes. Once they're on your PC, you can batch encode them to a file format that your PC will play faster. So you can kind of get the best of both worlds. One other advantage of shooting in high efficiency is if you are having to send your files over to an editor over the internet, those 4K files are going to go a lot faster because the file size is that much smaller. And so that's another advantage of high efficiency. All right, moving down. Now we're starting to get into the photo options. Here are options. If we tap on this, are 24 MP, that stands for megapixels. 24 MP. I always like to have the highest possible setting for the photos. The next one, I have this turned on. You might have yours turned off. Pro RAW resolution control. And what this means is if you have this turned on, now when you go to take a shot, you will have the option of turning, just tapping a little button, and then the photo that you take will be shot in the RAW format. The downside is that it does take up more space on your hard drive. The one thing that I might say is that I believe that if you have this set to RAW and you're taking all your photographs in RAW, unless you have specific software like Lightroom, Photoshop, you might not be able to see those shots. And again, you might have to convert those to JPEGs using some kind of special software before you can see the shots. So there's downsides. If you haven't started working with Photoshop and Lightroom and some of these programs, you might want to stick with having the Pro turned off. But there are advantages. By having this turned on, you'll see that it has activated another menu system. We should probably tap into that and see what our options are. So we see we have 3 options. What are they? The first one is, again, like how I was telling you about the compression scheme for high efficiency video. If you have it selected to HEIF max, it's going to still take a very high-end RAW photo up to 48 megapixels, which is great. But if you look down, you'll see that it's only going to take up 5 megabytes on your hard drive. Whereas if you're shooting in Pro RAW Max, you'll see that each photo that you take is 75 megabytes. And so there's a big difference between the two settings. I think that if you have a PC, you might want to choose the Pro RAW Max, even though it takes up more space on your hard drives. It's probably going to be something that you will be able to see better on your PC. The other option is 12 megapixels, but I always like to go for the highest possible megapixels. In the end, it'll be worth taking the time of offloading your phone more regular to the hard drive of your computer. And by the way, I know that it is kind of tricky to move a lot of gigabytes from your phone over to your hard drives. We'll have to maybe do an episode on that, show you what I do to minimize the pain and grief of doing that. All right, now we're getting back into our video settings. ProRes, Apple ProRes. That's a whole new codec that the latest iPhones are offering. If you've got an earlier iPhone, this may not show up on your menu setting, but if you have a recent iPhone, this should be an option. I would recommend turning it on here. Just by turning it on here does not mean that every video that you take from now on is going to be shot in this ProRes codec. But it does mean that when you go to take a shot, you'll see a little symbol along the side of your camera app that you can just tap and quickly turn on the ProRes codec. In addition to shooting ProRes, you'll see that I have, just tap on this, you'll see that I have set it to shoot in the log format, which gives me a little bit more information when I go to edit the video. When you turn your ProRes on and it's in the log format, it looks really grayed out. It looks milky, I say, and you look at it and you say, well, that looks awful. I don't want that. But really, that's just what log format looks like, and it's when you bring it into the computer that you process it, and you're able to bring back more information than you would if you were just shooting in a normal video codec. So I like to have this turned on so that I at least have the option of turning it on just before I take the shot. If I see something really important that I know I'm going to want to use or maybe even submit to a stock media company, then I'll want to change it to log format so that I can enhance it before I send it to the stock media company. All right, well, that's it for formats. Let's tap on camera to go back to some of these other menu settings real quick. Preserve settings. This is something I want to show you. You remember me talking about the little options that you can tap on or off, little adjustments that you can make on your screen just before you take your shot. Well, the question they're asking you right now is, do you want the camera to remember the changes that you make the next time you want to take a shot? Do you want it to remember what you just adjusted to, or start from scratch again? And you can go through these settings and decide which of these you would want the camera or the phone to remember each time you make an adjustment. Let me give you an example. Let's say it's getting close to the evening setting and the shots that you're taking, this doesn't seem like it's getting the correct exposure. Well, I'll show you in the next lesson how you can adjust the exposure just before you take the shot. And the question is, do you want the camera to remember that adjustment that you made so that the next time you go to take a shot in that dusk setting, you have to make that adjustment again? If you know you're going to take 20, 30 shots, do you really want to be making that adjustment every time you pick up the camera? Or do you want the camera to remember the adjustment that you made for that setting? I kind of like to have the camera remember that, because often I'll take 20, 30 shots in a given setting and the lighting is probably going to stay fairly consistent. So why make adjustments every time you go to make a shot? So I like to have that turned on. But then there are some things like Apple ProRes, I have that turned off. The live photo, I have turned off. And so you can go through these and decide what you want the camera to remember. If I had the Apple ProRes turned on here, once I tapped on it to take one in the ProRes, then it's going to remember that and take everything else in the Apple ProRes. My hard drive is going to fill up very quickly. And so I have that turned off. I have to tap it every time I want something shot in ProRes. The next one is grid, and you'll see I have mine turned off. What this does is it helps new photographers learn how to compose their shots. So if you're new to photography, it might be a good idea for you to turn that on, and the camera at the screen, back of the screen, will give you those lines that will help you compose your shots. And we're going to do a whole lesson on following the rule of thirds when you're setting up your shot. And for that lesson especially, it's a good idea to have this grid turned on. Level, it's another it gives you a little line on the middle of your screen to let you know when you've got your camera off level. I like to have that turned on. Photographic styles, well, just tap on that for a moment and slip through this. You'll see that you can actually set the camera to have a filter on it. If you like really warm shots, you could keep it on that, and all the shots that you take after that will be warm. It's not a big thing because you can always add this later. When you go to edit your photos, you can add this type of thing after the fact. So I usually keep mine on standard, and that way the photos I take are fairly neutral without any filters on it. Sometimes when you use a filter at this level, you're kind of baking that in, and then you try and adjust it back to a normal look, and sometimes you don't always get the normal look back. So I like to shoot everything in the natural look. Then if I want to make the photo look warm, we'll do that with editing software, probably Photoshop or Lightroom, rather than try and do it with the camera. Portraits in photo mode. Well, this is interesting. In previous versions of the iPhone software for cameras, you had to select a setting just before you took the photo if you wanted it to be in the portrait mode. Well, with i15, I believe, and forward, i16 now, you can turn this on, and even if you take photos in your photo mode rather than the portrait mode, it's still going to give you the option in the edit to add that depth of field. We'll talk more about that. I like to have that on because now all of the photos I take, I can add the depth of field if I want to. Prioritize faster shooting. Yeah, lens correction. Sometimes especially if you have your zoom all the way wide open, the photos can get a little bit distorted. Well, having that lens correction on will minimize that. And so that's good. Macro control, if you like to get shots real close up of flowers, it's nice to have that. All right, well, those are the settings that I wanted to show you on the phone itself to help you get ready to turn on your Apple Camera app. And now when you go out, you are going to have the most options possible. Just before you take the shot, you can make adjustments before you press record on video or tap that button to take an amazing photograph. You'll have the most options available. And I just might say before we close that what we've just taken a look at are the settings for the Apple Camera app. There are other apps that you can download. Some are free, some are you have to purchase, that will give you even more options that you can use when taking photos or video with your phone. And I think before we finish up this series, we'll have to take a look at some of those apps as well. But that does it for today. I hope that you were able to pick up some good tips, help you understand the various camera settings that you can adjust and why it's important to have the best settings possible to help you get the best possible photos and videos when you go out to film or shoot. So long for today. We'll see you next time here at Learning Media Skills.